Hi, so we're going to talk about the stage group dashboard for package that, um, and I'm Jacob from the scalability team, and we're doing this sort of as a kind of onboarding to get you familiar with the fact that these dashboards are there and what you can do with them and see if you have questions about them. Um, so to give a bit of background, we So in scalability, we've been doing work to try and label different types of Rails requests and Sidekick jobs according to what feature category they belong to. And the idea is that we can sort of break down what goes inside the Rails app by feature category, because otherwise it's just one big bowl of spaghetti and you don't know whose code is doing what. Um, so the general idea is to develop a view into the app by feature category. And this has been an ongoing project, but we felt that we were now at a point that we have enough labeling and data that we can automatically generate more or less useful dashboards. And now we're at the point where we want to reach out to all the different stage groups and say, here's the auto-generated dashboard just based on the labels. Um, this is what the graphs mean, and this is how you modify them, because these dashboards are defined in a language called jsonnet, and they're committed in a Git repo. It used to be that all the dashboards, so the dashboards are ultimately in Grafana. You can edit them in the web UI, but that is not very good for version management or not stepping on each other's changes. So it's also a little bit about showing people that this stuff is there with jsonnet and how to use it. And the other thing I should say up front is that I am not not a super expert on all this stuff. I don't work on this most of the time. This is also not within the team. This is not my project, but I kind of know how it works and where everything is. And there's just so many stage groups we need to reach out to that we're spreading the work across multiple people. So that's why I'm now reaching out to you. Any questions so far? Okay. So I think what I'll do next is I'll share my screen and show you the dashboard a little bit and where it comes from, so that we're on the same page of what is there and how it works. See if my browser is ready. Yeah. So this is Grafana. This is dashboards GitLab net. This is the URL I always need to remember. If you go there, you can log in with I think you can log in via Google, and then it goes through via Okta and whatnot, and you're in there. So these are not public, but anyone can get in them if they have a Google account with GitLab. And this is the one for package. So there's we already modified it a little bit because I asked David, and there were 3 columns, one for API and one for web and one for Git, but there is no Git traffic that belongs to package. So we took that Git column out. So the way this is organized is by rows. And these rows are standardized, and we'll see later where they come from. And you can collapse some of them. So you can collapse the request rates and the latencies. This is maybe a good way to see what's in there, because otherwise you just keep scrolling. Yeah, so these are our rows. And in the bottom row, which is kind of weird, there's this link here that says contribute to this dashboard on gitlab.com. And if you click that, you get taken to the runbooks repo, which is a sort of general purpose repository used by the infrastructure department for all sorts of configuration data. And that is where the definitions are. So we'll look here later. But that's one way to find the file where the actual definition is. And while we have Sidekick open, so here's some Sidekick detail. We can see jobs completing and which ones are erroring. And this is broken down by Sidekick worker. So this one that's speaking here is container expiration policies, cleanup container repository working. That seems to be a spiky one. And then this purple one is releases create evidence worker. But on the whole, these rates are not super high, right? Because this is jobs per second, and we're looking at peaks of half a job per second. but this is what it looks like. And this is actually an important point about these dashboards. They auto scale. So they always zoom in so that things fill the vertical space. So if your rates are low, the peaks will still look like peaks. So you always need to keep an eye on the left here, what the scale is. And same here with error rates, because we have some errors here, but it's peaking at 0.02 per second. And well, the rate is also low, but these peaks may not be dramatic. And if you have something that almost never errors, then maybe one error can will show up as a peak, and then the dashboard zooms in and you're like, oh, there's a peak, but it's a small number. Now going back up, we have data for the caches. I'm making this up. I don't really know what this is. Probably the Rails cache, the Rails cache object that we would have annotations on, and you can see it's broken down by request. Then we have SQL latency instrumentation, and I think we're also working on getting more SQL detail, like seeing which things are doing too much work in transactions and stuff like that. So this can be useful to detect problems. Yeah, more SQL panels. Error rates. Sometimes there's no data. I'm not really sure why there is no data. It could be that there's just not enough errors on these things. It could also be that these are broken. If we want to know if they're broken, maybe we can look at a different dashboard. Oh, okay, shouldn't jump around too much. 95th percentile latencies, request rates, and then here at the top, so this is sort of backwards. At the top, we have there's something called the 4 golden signals, but we have only 3 of them. The 4 golden signals are latency, request per second, error rates, and saturation. But so latency is how fast things are, and they are a very useful signal if things are healthy, because if things are slower for whatever reason, if things are slower, that is a very clear symptom that something's wrong, even if you don't know what the cause is. And we don't track latencies, but we track aptexes, which is if you use New Relic, aptex means something very specific. What it means for us is percentage of requests that are fast enough. So there's some threshold that means fast enough, and we just count how many percent of requests are fast enough. And this gives you a useful, if a lot of stuff is slow, then these numbers will go down. So this is our proxy for latency. Error ratio is just errors per second. Sorry, no, errors out of as a percentage of total traffic. And you can see here that's very low. And there are some automatic thresholds here where alerts will start happening, but like we're not even near those. And then here we have requests per second, which is what you think it is. And what's missing is the saturation, which is how many resources we're using on the server, and how much, like if we are using 100% CPU or not. The reason we don't have saturation is that we can't really break down CPU, something like CPU usage within the Rails process and say that CPU is because of package. We just don't have that insight. It's one process, and we can say, well, that server has, or that process is using so much CPU, but we can say because of what stage group it is or because of what feature category. So we don't have that 4th panel, although it would have been nice. Any questions so far? And you can see here that so SLI means service level indicator, and you can see that they're broken down by, actually, I'm not sure what they're broken down by. Wait, web API. So container registry would be a separate, I think these are different apps, right?
I think there are the categories, because we do have a container registry pages on the Rails app.
Oh, that would be it. Yeah. So you have about 5 categories here. Release evidence, package registry, and dependency proxy is 4, container registry is 5. Yeah. Yeah. So that's what's here. And this is all auto-generated. So it, on the one hand, there is some useful stuff in there, but it's not going to be, yeah, it's all going to look the same, a little bit the same, and it's not going to be super pretty and tweaked to what it is you want to see, which is also always a bit difficult with auto-generated dashboards, of course. So if we have no questions about what's in here, I would now go and show you where this comes from, so you understand how this is generated. Shall we go there now? Okay. So the link was at the bottom, but I still have it open. So this is a JSONnet file. JSONnet is a templating language that lets you create JSON. So ultimately what goes into Grafana is JSON, and we have a CI pipeline that's on this repo that generates the JSON from these JSONnet files and stuffs them into Grafana with API requests. But we don't have to do all that. That just happens when you make a change here. So that is a nice way of working. And this file is very short because all it really does is it says the stage group, this is for its package. And there's this one tweak here that this list normally would have the word Git in it. And I removed the word Git so that that column of Git requests that were always 0 is gone. So this is almost a blank slate dashboard. And all the stuff comes from this file. So this is an import from a file in the same directory. Libsonnet means that it is library code. It's not meant, this file is not meant to generate JSON itself, but it contains functions that are used. So this is a function call that generates JSON. And then this stuff does more function call JSONnet stuff. I'm not very good at JSONnet. But there's also a documentation link at the bottom of the dashboard. And also if you Google JSONnet, you find they have a sort of, their landing page is a tutorial on how the language works. But it's interesting to look at this file now because that shows us a little bit where the dashboard actually comes from. So for that, I need to go to the directory. And it's here. So this has more going on. This is a file with what, 500 lines. And here we have some, I think this is a function. It'd be nice to look at this thing. So here we have the SLIs at the top. So the SLIs should be somewhere in here. And I think they're halfway through. So this is defining the SLIs. And then here the dashboard starts. Dashboards, group dashboard feature category, add template stages. And then there is an introduction. Where do we see that introduction? We don't even see that here. Add panels, feature category SLIs, this is it. Rails request rates, Rails 95th percentile request latency. So we saw those down here, right? This is Rails request rate. So these things come from these function calls. And it's all parameterized where you can put feature categories in there. So the feature categories come from, we probably looked them up somewhere from the stage group. So the name goes in here, and then something calculates the feature categories. It's a bit of a puzzle for me. What I'm trying to say is it's basically a big function with lots of arguments, and we plug in all the possible values of the arguments, and then all these dashboards come out. And that's where the standard page comes from. This is a bit hand wavy, but are you still with me? So this is how this is generated. Um, so the next two things I want to show you is an example. I'm going to look for an example of a different stage group that has more customizations, so you can see what that looks like. And I'm going to show you what I should have shown you earlier, which is the README of the dashboards, which contains some useful information. If I go up to this dashboards directory, this has a README. And it's important that you know this README exists because it's not linked well from the top level README. But this README explains how to hack on dashboards. And I won't talk you through it all, but if you want to hack on dashboards, you need to remember that the dashboards directory has a README. And if you read those steps slow enough, you find how it works. And the most important thing is, well, I can talk you through it very quickly. If you want to do development on these things, you need to install a JSONnet compiler that reads these JSONnet files and spits out the JSON. And there is a concept like bundler, Ruby bundler, but for JSONnet called JSONnet bundler. So you need to install that because you need dependencies. And so JB install, that's the bundler. And so that is like bundle install, but for JSONnet. And then in this directory, there is a script that lets you create, so this is the test dashboard script. So you run that on one file. And what it does is it generates a JSON and it creates a temporary dashboard in Grafana on dashboards GitLab net, and it uploads it there and gives you the link. So the nice thing, because one of the difficult things with development here is that the data that goes in is Prometheus data that is queried from Prometheus. But if you're doing local development, you cannot query that Prometheus server directly. So when you make changes, you need to deploy them to a temporary dashboard, and then you can see real data in your edited dashboard. That's more or less the workflow. Another workflow you can follow is that you somehow make changes in Grafana itself, but I think then it's hard to get them back into JSONnet. So it's better to edit the JSONnet, see the uploaded results, and iterate like that. So that was a bit of a digression about how that works. And now I wanted to show you, unless you have questions. Nope. Okay. Sorry. One other thing that's important, but you will run into it if you don't think about this, is that there's an API token that you need to use to upload these temporary dashboards, and that's in 1Password. So you should have access to that. So that's roughly how that works. And this, yeah, there's a lot of files here because this is defining all the dashboards, which is a lot. But the stage groups one is the directory we're working in. And I should look for something with recent edits. Wait, that is me. 1 week ago. I think source code may have a more, no, it does not have a more complicated dashboard. Continuous integration. Oh, there we go. They have customizations. So you can see that at the top, they still, and I should give us an example of your dashboard. Just here. So this is a almost plain file. And you see here that there's still this call to stage group dashboards.dashboard. So that is the same. But then there's a whole lot of extra stuff after that. So that's roughly what that looks like. And it does these add panel calls. And I haven't looked at this before the call to know exactly what the customizations are here. But actually, as I say that, we should just look at that. If I go to dashboards GitLab net, oh, that's another thing. It's good to see what it looks like. If you go to dashboards GitLab net, you end up on this triage page, which is used by infrastructure engineers. If you click on that name, you get a search box. So if you type stage group, then you see the stage groups folder. And now we can find, where's the one for continuous? Now continuous integration. Okay, so what are their modifications? That is standard. That is standard. Oh, that's interesting. You can see that their modifications must be at the bottom because this is all the standard stuff. And that's also an important thing to realize about how this works. So this first call creates a bunch of standard stuff. And then if you add stuff, it will be lower on the page. So this is all standards. And now here they have metrics for build logs. So they have a text panel and a graph. And in their definition, you can see that here's the text and here's the graph. And the graph itself is a Prometheus query with template values in there, like $environment, $_interval. The way I approach these things is that I look for something for another dashboard that has what I want, and then I copy paste it and I modify it till it works. But it's important. I'm trying to tell you about the different layers that are working here, because it's one thing if you know Prometheus and if you can make the graph you want, but the moment it goes into Grafana starts putting variables into your Prometheus query. So you also need to think about the various Grafana puts in. And then there's templating at the level of JSonnet here. So yeah, templating all the way down. But this is roughly what it looks like when you modify these things. Any questions so far? Okay, I think this is sort of my improvised tour, and yeah, we should talk about what. So on the for you guys' dashboard, I created an epic just to keep track of whatever we do. So if we don't have questions about how this stuff works, maybe we can go through the epic and the issues and what, because we created those early on, maybe we don't want them anymore, or what, yeah, see what you want with them and how we can help. Okay, then I should go and share again and look for the epic. So that's this one. So we have 5 issues here now, and yeah, they pretty much all came from me talking with David on the first issue. And yeah, let's just look at them one by one. So add panels by package type. So we had a bit of discussion here about how to do that. Yeah, what are your thoughts? Do you still want to build this, David?
Yeah, you can see on the panels that, for example, on the API panels, everything is a bit mixed up. And
yeah,
really the APIs, the one you can see with /packages /the type, those ones are coming from clients that are tools. So the usage of the API is really like each package type, it's its own world, if you want. So it doesn't make sense to have all them in the same panel.
Yeah. So one thing that is important or useful to think of with these things is to keep in mind what question you want to answer with your dashboard. Because if you just look at all the data and think of what I want to see all the data, then it's hard to design a good dashboard. And so in this case, because there are so many different combinations we could do, like we could split all these things out by packages, by package types, but then it would become even more cluttered than it already is. So I think the next step for that is to think. So I think we can probably do this. I'm sure we can do this. But for each of these package types, what would you like to see?
I guess one useful insight would be the latency on the API endpoints.
Yeah.
That the
So
clients.
maybe just these basic 3: the app tags, error rate ratio, and RPS.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be a good start. Okay, so yeah, I think then the next step would be to come up with Prometheus. Well, look for examples or come up with a Prometheus query that does what you want. And then figure out how to get that into a new panel or a series of panels for each of these. But I would start by having a query where I can. So what I would do, there's this thing, Thanos. Do you know what Thanos is? I shouldn't assume because there's viewers who cannot say they don't know what Thanos is. Prometheus is our metrics collection framework that we use. And it's an in-memory time series database. And at some point you run out of memory or you have too many time series. So Thanos is an app that people build around Prometheus that does two things. It lets you send queries across multiple Prometheus servers. So it solves the problem of too many time series in memory in one server because one Prometheus is one process. The other problem it solves is that you can't go back in time long enough. So when Prometheus runs out of memory or out of disk to remember your stuff, Thanos will upload it to object storage so it can dynamically go back in time and get Prometheus data out of object storage and somehow magically run the big query on that. So the short version, it glues together multiple Prometheuses and gives us more history. So this is usually the interface you want to query Prometheus. And if you just go to thanos.gitlab.net, then you get an OAuth login thing, and you should all be able to get in. And here you can play with queries. So maybe we can look for a moment at the requests. So if we want to look at API request rates, where does this come from? Let's see. So one thing I like doing is you can have the view, which is useful if you just want to blow it up and see what everything is, because all these panels are very small. But there's also explore. Here, I just told you about Thanos, and now I'm saying actually you should use explore. Explore is an interface like what Thanos gives you for graph building, but it's built into Grafana, so it might actually be the smarter thing to use here. So what I'm wondering now is how do we find these? So these are actions, and here we have a regex. So if we would say, I see Maven is a thing. So if I say .star/Maven .star, oops, and run query, then that goes a long way. And now here we can have, okay, so I don't know exactly how this works in this part of Grafana, but you can have these dollar variables and substitutions. So if this was a variable, and at one level in the stack, we can make this a variable, you can interpolate different values for Maven here and break it down like that. And you could also make this regex a bit more specific if you start catching wrong things. Like if you want to say it has to have packages, then you can also just say this, of course. Whoops, don't press enter, press run query. Yeah, so I would start playing like this. And yeah, the other thing I would look for is how did this thing get generated? So I came from the Rails request rates. Okay, let's forget about CI/CD for a moment. This came from the libsonnet file. That's here. That was called Rails request rates. And that is a magic function that takes these arguments. So now I need to know how Rails request rate works. Oh, there we go. And here's the query. So this takes these arguments, but we could add another argument here. And I think %, yeah, here's type. See, type is a thing, and this is doing string interpolation. This % is, sorry, a cat is now walking onto my keyboard. Please not on the keyboard, cat. No, 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 not on the silly cat. So what I would start doing, I would probably copy paste this whole thing, give it a different name, try to call it from within this file to add a different thing with a new row with a different name. And then I would tweak this query so that instead of action is $action, it would look sort of like this. Well, I would take this thing and then try to make it generate the right strings. It's a bit hand wavy, but does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
And once you get to know JSonnet a little bit better, then you can also just write a for loop that's where you define an array with the values like so Maven and I don't know what else do we have, Conan and other things, and you can define those in an array, and then you can loop call this function that we would make for each value in the array, right? So we would have a function like this, but with a different name that shows your request rates for the package type, and you can call that in a loop because we just saw that Rails request rate gets called in a loop. Here you go. This is a for loop. That's the basic idea. Okay, let's look at another issue. And I should maybe write a comment later about what I suggested here, but well, it's also now in the video. Misattributed endpoints. Yeah, this is an interesting, this is bound to happen. We did this effort of trying to get 100% labeling on everything in the app, but at some point we're going to make mistakes, or we're going to have things where we don't know how to label them. So it could be that, well, you just told us, David, that some of these things are labeled wrong. And the way to fix that is to find the controllers. So, well, these are workers. So, okay, maybe we can just look for this one because a psychic worker is easier to find. That was an evidence worker. So there we go. Because of this line, it's part of the release evidence feature. And because release evidence is associated with your stage group, that's why it's on your dashboard. So if this is wrong, the way to fix it is to edit this file, find out who it does belong to, make sure they agree, and make a merge request on the main repo and update this label. And the same principle applies to web and API requests. We have a similar DSL for making these changes. So that's all I would say about that one. Let me clean up a little. Then we have add container registry graphs. So Joao, what was your, you asked a question here. So what, I think this, David, you brought this up, but what do we want here?
Yeah, my question was mostly if we really want to duplicate, or not really duplicate, but embed those panels in the package dashboard, or instead just drop a link for the registry dashboards, because given it is a separate application, there is no direct correlation between metrics from both GitLab Rails and package that we could interleave in the same panel. So for me, at least, it would make more sense to keep them separate, because we can't go deep enough on the package dashboards.
Well, that makes sense. And ultimately, that is all up to you, what you want to see there. I think there are, there's little links like this. So I think if it was me, I would probably want them somewhere here at the top. You mentioned the extra links. This is generated by a function, and this is all about Rails. So this is not the place to put it, but where does this even go? Okay, this is completely different stuff. Well, all these elements are, it's this nested, it's a bit like Rails views, right? Like you have all these things that are nested in each other. So I think this is actually a global thing of our Grafana dashboards. By the way, this is a really cool button. I don't know if you know it, but here you have feature flag toggles. So you can see that Jaguars set the CI jobs feature flag there. So for SREs trying to understand an incident, it's very useful to see when something happened, but you can turn these off if they're cluttering. And on some dashboards, you can also see deploys. I don't know why we don't have deploys here. Oh, here we are, deploys. So that, oh, that deploy took time. Yeah, so I guess the question for the container registry would be, what is the natural way to have some extra links on this page and where to put them? Unless, David, you want to embed container registry panels anyway, and then you need to figure out between the two of you how you want to do this. But if you just want to have a link, which also makes sense to me, then the next question is, what is the natural way to make that happen in jsonnet? And I would have to get back to you on that because I'm not an expert on how all this stuff is set up.
Yeah, a link makes sense.
Yeah, okay. And I'll write a note about that later. Then we have missing endpoints. And I think we have a suspicion about what's going on here. This is the other side of the coin. Like there are some things that are showing up in your dashboard that don't belong to you, and there's some things missing, but it could just be because they don't happen a lot. And because this is a recording, I am not going to go into our logs because then we can hopefully keep the recording public. But one way to cross-check this is to go into elk, so log gitlab.net, into Kibana, and search for these requests in the Rails log. Because the same labels are used there, the same feature category labels. And if something happens only 1 in 1,000 or in 10,000 or something, then it becomes 0 in Prometheus, or it becomes invisible. But if something happened only once in a week, you can still find it in the logs. So you have more detail that way. And if the answer is just that these things are attributed correctly. Oh, and the other thing that logs would tell you, of course, I forgot now, is if you find the last time it happened, and if it has the right feature category label in the logs, then you also know that it has the right feature category label in the graphs. It's just that the graphs have nothing to show. That can happen. But if it's labeled wrong in the logs, then this is an example of missing, of updating labels, updating feature categories in the Rails app, just like with the other issue. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. And then we still have this global issue of where it was assigned for me to talk to you. And I guess on that one, we were talking about updating the handbook. Oh, I'm going to say this. I'm going to close this when this is merged. So I'm going to close this. That was fast. Yeah. Any other thoughts or questions? So one last thing I want to say here is I'm not trying to create work for you by reaching out to you and telling you about this. It's just that we want to make sure everybody knows it's there, and if it's useful for you, and if you want to work with it, that's great. And if you don't have an immediate use for this right now, that's fine. You can, if you have a question in the future, I realize, hey, I really want to know how this feature is behaving on gitlab.com or what's going on here, then you know that these dashboards are there. And if there's something specific that is not in the auto-generated ones, then you know that you need to be in the runbooks repo and fiddle with jsonnet to get your custom graphs in there. And the other thing is that when you have questions about how to yeah, about how to do this stuff, where the scalability team is happy to help you. The basic attitude here is that we don't want to feed everybody, but we want to teach people how to fish. And if you're not hungry right now, that's okay. But you know the fish are there.
No, that's something useful. For example, one need we have is we would like to monitor the most used registries. For example, NPM and Maven are the two most used registries, and we would like to have a view on how the API endpoints perform, but only for these. And that's why the whole idea of separating by package types came from.
So if there's only two, then you maybe want to just start with doing those two, and you can even make your job even easier if you just say I pick one, because then you don't have to figure out all the parameterization. If you can make pretty graphs for npm where the word npm is hard coded, and you see what you want, then you can come back and say like, okay, now I know I have to write graphs, and now I just need to figure out templating in jsonnet to change the word npm. But yeah. Okay, well, we've been talking for 45 minutes already. Wow. Thanks so much for your time. If we have no other questions, then I'm going to stop recording. Yeah, okay, I'm going to stop recording. Where's that button?